your city, every back road, every alley, every pothole. Love your city, every back road. Come together, fight for your home.
Welcome to the Love Your City podcast. My name is Bob Dalton, and each episode I interview people doing grassroots work in their communities. This episode I have the privilege of interviewing Matt Maceira. He's the founder and he's the executive director of Be Bold Street Ministries. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Oh, glad to be here.
Man, well, there's so many different ways that I feel like I could start this particular podcast because of how dynamic your particular story is, how many things that you've been through to get to the point where you're serving the homeless here in Salem, Oregon. But take us all the way back, because our parents have such a effect on us for the good and the bad. And your parents had a massive involvement in your life in a particular way. Take us back on what your relationship with your parents were growing up and some of the early stages in your life.
Yeah, so life was really difficult. My mom had full-blown polio as a child, so she was and still is disabled. My dad was a gang leader within the Latin Kings. So the dynamic within our home, tumultuous. I mean, there's many words that we could use to describe it. Violent, chaotic.
Did you have siblings?
Yeah, I had one brother, an identical twin brother. Ultimately, I lost him a bunch of years ago due to chemical psychosis. Ended up taking his own life, you know. But that trajectory started when we were kids with our parents, you know.
Was there moments in your childhood that stand out, those core memories that you remember when you think back? Maybe it could have been done through counseling that you've done, or, you know, I recently did hypnotherapy that took me back to very specific core memories in my childhood. Was there any core memories that stand out to you when you think about that childhood on things that really impacted you for good or bad, that really have stayed with you and almost show up sometimes?
Absolutely. So something that really put me on a trajectory was at 3 years old, me and my brother survived a sexual assault that it doesn't make sense that we physically survived. And that determined so many decisions and choices for me in the midst of targeting people that liked hurting children. And I was totally okay with disfiguring somebody for the rest of their life based off from my own situation that happened for me as a kid. And I'm going to defend, and I'm not going to have any boundaries when it came to that. Like, you like hurting kids, then I'm okay with disfiguring you, and I'm going to eat a meal and sleep like a baby. So that was a core memory, unfortunately, a negative one. But so many of them are negative from my childhood. Watching my dad kill somebody right next to me before I was 10 years old, took the life out of that man. We literally watched his eyes dilate for the last time. He took him, kicked him in the river. The money that he got from that man went to buy us candy. And then we went and sat. It was known as the pub here. My dad got lit, and we sat in the owner's office as if nothing had happened. Nothing out of the ordinary took place that day. It was just on one of those days.
And when you witnessed that, obviously, like, it's extremely traumatic, but was it something that you started to buy into, that this is the way of life for me? You know, usually we have people that we look up to of who we aspire to be. Did you look at your dad and say, I want to be like him? Or did you say, I want to not be like him, I want to go a different direction when you were growing up?
Yeah, so ultimately, I started to emulate my dad for sure. He started letting us drink at about 8 years old, and then violence came natural to me, which was a part of my dad's life as well. We were exposed to it. It's how we were shown you deal with problems. You solve it with violence, and that's how you create peace, right? You hurt somebody, then there's peace, which is crazy. So at 11 years old, somebody stabbed me in the leg. I pulled the knife out of my leg and stuck it in their stomach. And I was hooked, just like I was on the mind-altering substances. So I did start to emulate my dad. I started to live the same life that he did in many aspects. And violence was one of the worst addictions that I ever battled with, violence and power. But it was something that he instilled in us from really young, impressionable ages.
Did you and your brother feed off of each other in that time of violence? Like, was it something that you guys really came together on and created unity around?
So initially, there was a lot of violence. We were beating on each other all the time, beating each other up, throw a brick, hit my brother in the back of the head, cracked his head open. And my response was, he should have moved. I told him to move. And then I walked inside while he was unconscious on the sidewalk and just went to watch TV. So it was just commonplace, and it was, I just shared it matter of fact because it was. And so there was violence, but then there was a time where we did come together and we could fight. But if anybody else tried to come in and or was doing something to myself or him, then it was going to be really bad for that individual. We did get to a place where we stopped fighting and just directed our aggressions at others.
What was fear like during that time period? Like how, like, was it a fearful time, or were you literally naive to the amount of things that you should be fearful of? Like, how did you deal with fear?
Yeah, I do remember being afraid as a kid because our lives were on the line on a regular basis. The chaos was familiar. So there, you find comfort in what's familiar, even though it's terrible. Or I did. And our biggest fear was being abused again. I had nightmares about it all the time. Ended up going through 9 years worth of counseling. It absolutely controlled every aspect and facet of my life for a really long time. The fear of being hurt physically, gang violence, knives, guns, that wasn't a fear for me. But for sure, the fear of sexual abuse was there for a really long time until I got old enough and big enough to where somebody just wouldn't try it, because I had to tell a couple of people, I said, hey, you're not that, I'm okay with taking your life. I'm okay taking your last heartbeat, and I'm not going to lose any sleep over it or have any guilt over it. And so people stopped.
Yeah. What was your teen years like? So you've experienced some crazy trauma at 10. You and your brother fighting all the time. Your dad's in a gang. What was the high school years like?
Constantly depressed because of the life that I lived.
Were you even in school?
So I went to 5 high schools. Court school, ACE program. I was part of the pilot program here, which was the Structured Learning Center, which ended up giving birth to Barbara Roberts. It was only an expulsion program at that time.
So you were getting kicked out a lot?
Oh yeah, it took me, I think I had the quickest expulsion in Salem, Kaiser, in the district. It took me 14 days to be expelled from South after I stabbed somebody with an X-Acto knife and had just violently assaulted 2 other students before that happened. They'd had enough.
Bouncing around.
Yeah. Yep.
And were you in any sort of correctional facilities at the time?
In and out of juvenile as a kid.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, in and out of juvenile. The first time I had law enforcement contact due to crime was 11.
When you're in that much of a violent state, and you're in that much of almost like a responsive state, can you see at all down the road? Like, was there any sort of ounce of hope or glimpse of future in your mind at that time? Like, take us into the mind of a high school kid who is experiencing that much trauma and violence. What was the future like for you when you thought about it?
There was no future. None. I was shared that by my teachers, by anybody and everybody else. Don't you know who their dad is? My dad's getting arrested on front page articles while we're in school. You're never going to amount to nothing. You're worthless. So everything that should never be shared with any child. And so I got to this place where I'm like, hey, check this out. I'm going to make sure you're not disappointed. And I made sure that people were not disappointed in their assessment of me. And so
you lived into it.
Absolutely, just leaned into it.
Was there any time where you were fearful of one wrong decision could result to you being in prison long term, or was that not even a fear?
Yeah, depending on the situation, I didn't need to think through. If it's time to be violent, it's time to be violent. And whatever the outcome is the outcome.
So violence, anger, revenge was the path. At what point in your life did that path start to change?
Yeah, so for sure, when I was about 12 and a half years old-ish, give or take some months, I was invited to a church here in Salem Heights Church, and I had been disrespected. Pastor's son hit me in the face as hard as he could as I was talking with somebody with a ball from across the gym. And he obviously had me confused with somebody that he was going to be able to do that to, that wasn't going to respond. And so my response was, I'm going to take his life. And so they funneled him down the basement of the church. We were asked to leave due to my response. So as we're leaving, we're going out the back door and we're taking off, and this guy opens up the door and makes this antagonizing statement. Yeah, the steps go down. And I was like, forget this. So I told my friends, my brothers, said, you guys are going to want to leave because I'm going to kill this guy and you don't want to be connected to it. And I pulled my knife out, had the intentions of going up to him and sticking it in between his collarbone and hitting him in the heart with it. And I was fine with it. I wasn't bothered by the thought of ending his life due to...
the amount of embarrassment that you experienced?
He disrespected me.
Yeah.
And what our dad instilled in us is that you demand respect. And if somebody doesn't respect you for who you are, then they will respect what you do to them. And so I was gonna demand respect by taking his life.
So that was your first experience at church?
Well, my first experience at church was I had an uncle that used to beat me and my brother, unrecognizable. We lived with him for about 6 months, and he was a pastor at that time. So that's why I was like,
so confused.
It's not for me. I didn't have any understanding. I was ignorant of the word. It was foolishness to me because I didn't believe. And I clustered everybody into that. I'm like, this is the guy that's teaching people. So they're obviously all like that, right? Which was a misstep, but I'm just a kid. And so God brought me to right conclusions, revealed to me that he was not a reflection of his son when he was beating on me and my brother, nor was the individual that came out and made that comment. Yeah. And now I get to serve side by side with that guy and the other guy that interceded, because he came out and he's like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
So one of your next times at church is this goes down, you want to kill the pastor's son. What was it after that kind of like started to shift the trajectory of your life? Because you obviously made some sort of a pivot from violence to service. What was that moment in your life, and when was it?
Yeah, so I didn't come to know the Lord until after my brother passed, and that was June 1st, 2004. Because after that moment I just shared with you, I ended up trying to take somebody else's life at the school that I went to. Wasn't the first time, wasn't the last time, and got removed from the community. And the judge said the community's not safe with you in it, so you don't get to be in it. And then I really prided myself on being really intentional about not getting caught. And unfortunately, I was really good at it. So I didn't come to know Christ till it's been about 18 years ago. So I continued to be...
And that was 2004?
Yeah, when my brother, June 1st, 2004 is when my brother passed away.
And how old were you then?
So that was right before our 24th birthday.
So teen years, violence, anger, a lot of close calls of you potentially putting yourself in a position to be jailed for a long period of time. You and your brother are close, twin brothers. Were you close at the time that he took his life? Did you guys have a close relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. I felt him die before I got the call. And at that time, I owned and operated. I was a professional tobacconist. And when he called me, an hour before he ended up taking his own life, I was on the way up to strip club up in Portland to fill my humidor that I had up there with cigars, because I was also okay with making money off from locations that put human beings on display for money, which is terrible. And he called me, and he walked through this whole process like, I'm gonna this, and this breaks my heart. I've given it to the Lord, but I was so sick of hearing it that I disregarded everything he was saying, and then I acted like I couldn't hear him anymore. And I was like, phone's breaking up. I love you. Please don't do anything. I can't hear you anymore. If you can hear me, I love you. And he just kept saying, I love you. I love you. And then hung up, and then all of a sudden, I just start getting sick. I hit the ground, started throwing up, and I'm like, oh no. And the bouncer, they have my stuff. He's got my phone. He's like, what's going on? My brother just died. And he's like, how do you know that? I said, I just felt him die. Identical twin, same DNA. And then my phone rings and I'm thrown up, so I can't answer it. He answers it and looking at me and just starts crying. And he's like, how did you know that? I said, I felt him die. And then that put me on a trajectory to the fulcrum moment that you're kind of leading to. But that wasn't enough for me to stop.
Yeah, where did you go from there? Like, what did the next month, 2 months look like for you as you're grieving your brother's loss and sorting through that and trying to make ends meet? And what did those next few months look like as you're sorting through this awakening of this new reality, this really tough new reality in your life?
Yeah, it was super terrible. So I used to pick him up every morning and he'd come be with me so I could kind of just be aware of what's going on because of the chemical psychosis that he had, or that he had brought on himself. And so for the first, it was honestly 2 years, I'd get up and I'd go over to my mom's house to pick him up, and I'd get there before it hit me and I'd remember that he was gone. I'd get up, get ready, go through the normal day, and then I'd just lay there. I'd put the chair back in my sports car and cry. Sometimes for 3 or 4 hours. It was, part of me died.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
So it's not just like he was just an older brother or younger brother. Literally part of me died that day. And I didn't have the Lord. So I had me to rely upon, which was not good.
That's what I was going to ask you next is, well, did you have anyone in your life to talk to about this, to sort through this? Everyone, when they're going through a massive stage of grieving, they need somebody. Did you have anyone that you could confide in?
The person, what I confided in the most was a bottle of Hennessy and narcotic pain medication and methamphetamine. So there was somebody that I could talk to for sure. Was this man, Pastor Matt Maceira, and he just kept sharing with me the hope that would never disappoint me.
How did you meet him?
So he was one of the guys that interceded when I went to go kill that other youth staff. He stepped out in the midst of that situation, goes, whoa, this doesn't have to happen.
So did he hear about your brother and kind of kept showing up in your life? And
Yeah, so he got a call from my grandma, and the whole time he'll tell the story. He says, I didn't want to go while I was picking up my keys and walking to my truck, and I get to the door at the church, and inside I don't want to go while I walk to my truck. And he got down there and was with me and interceded, kept me from beating 2 of the security staff to death at the hospital, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
It
so Pastor Matt, this guy just kept showing up.
Yeah.
And what did you think? Were you annoyed by it? Were you like, was there some sort of a comfort that you felt when he was around? Like, what was your energy and attitude around this time of grieving when this guy just keeps showing up in your life and he's kind of there for you?
I had only respect for him because he treated me with love and kindness, the same love and kindness that he was shown from God through his son.
And he kept showing up.
Yeah, and he kept showing up into not easy situations.
So there was a respect that you started to build for him where you're like, not anyone can just step into this type of a level of grief and anger and be with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what did some of your conversations with him look like as you started to really hear him out? Like, what was was there any conversations or moments that you remember specifically that was kind of a breakthrough moment for you?
Yeah, for sure. The moment of salvation. There was lots of conversations before that, but one real crucial moment really changed. God interceded. So it was like 6 days before we were going to do my brother's celebration of life service. And I've got, I don't know, maybe 350 plus people at my house. And there's all kinds of mind-altering substances, booze. And this guy that had reintroduced my brother to methamphetamine after he had a bunch of years of victory was there, and it was intentional. And we were going to kill him. And there was a bunch of people that were there that were going to stomp on him because everybody was going to be a part of it. And that way, when they show up to pick up his body or find his body wherever it's at, nobody would be able to determine who actually landed the killing blow because so many people stomped on him. And God interceded because he's walking his dog past my house going, this is not good. And he calls his wife. He's like, hey, I just need to know I need you to know where I'm at in case I don't show back up home. And this dude was there, Jeff, and he was like, almost 7 foot, 400 plus pound guy. And he's like, hey, Maceira, there's this guy out here. You want me to take him out? And I look out and I was like, no, that's part of my family. Comes in and he's like, you got to have these people leave. It's like, no, we're going to kill this guy. He's out there smoking meth behind my garage right now. And I'm going to take this steel pipe, crack his head in. Everybody's going to stomp on him. And he's like, and he's just looking at me and he's like, that can't happen today. We're doing your brother's service in 6 days. You love me enough to just, hold me accountable.
Tell you how it is.
Yeah, he's like, what are you doing? I'm doing what I know to do. And this all makes sense to me.
Yeah, and in his mind, he's like, let's make it to your brother's funeral.
Yeah.
Let's get to there as a next step.
Yeah.
So your life was changed through, you talk about your faith a lot. And one thing that, when I started this podcast, I really didn't want to make it about a particular faith. It's not a spiritual podcast by any means. This is a podcast that's focused on grassroots work, people taking action, living out their faith, living out their philosophy, and truly doing something in their local communities. What I appreciate about you is that your faith comes across extremely authentic. I meet a lot of people where when they talk about their faith or when they talk about God, it feels very fake. It feels like they talk about their faith more than they do anything about their faith. But with you, it feels really refreshing because it's so deeply a part of your story. Your faith journey has had such a massive part of your transformation from violence to service. When you came to faith or started living in the reality of your faith and learning about the love of God for you and your life, what were the next steps after that to help you start going more into a life of service from this previous life that you once had?
Yeah, so I came to know the Lord through the Lord interceding again in me planning and preparing the torture and murder of a different man. And God used the same man to intercede again. So I can fast forward a little bit. We're having a conversation in my mind. God, if you're real, I need you to show up. Like, I'm going to leave this guy's house covered in his blood. And I'm excited about it. I'm excited and I'm in great anticipation of torturing this individual. And I'm across 5 lanes of traffic. And after that took place, that thought in my mind, somebody started yelling my name from across the street. And fast forward, it was Matt. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, all I could think was my dry run didn't go well. A couple days later, comes into my room and he's sitting there, and halfway through the conversation, he goes, didn't you hear me yelling your name the other night? I'm like, are you serious? You have no idea what took place very second before you yelled. And God revealed to me there's no such thing as coincidence, happenstance, chance, or luck for me. And I believed in that moment after rejecting for a bunch of years because of my experiences. And I served for about 1.5 years. And then all the time that I was on the streets as an adult, I was saved. I said no to God and yes to me again.
So you had this kind of faith experience with Pastor Matt, literally what you feel like God intervened in your life and saved you from some pretty crazy situations. And then you went on with your life. And then how did you end up on the streets? So you went from like violence, sorting through your brother's grief, introduction to a life of faith, to now you're on the streets. What was your journey? Something usually happens, some sort of a disconnection with family, community, whatever it is, addiction. What was your reasoning for ending up living on the streets here in Salem?
Yeah, me and who I was with at the time both engaged in the drug world. So shooting up, smoking, snorting methamphetamine as much as we could get our hands onto. So life was not functional and ended up losing everything multiple times. Homes, caused me to be on the street, lost everything, was asked to leave where I was living. I ended up being in the bushes, exposed to the elements and hating every moment of it, and just continued to chase the drugs that were going to cloud my judgment and keep me stuck because I didn't want to feel it.
Were you a part of a homeless community Or was it you experiencing homelessness kind of by yourself floating around, or were you a part of a homeless camp?
Yeah, so I was a part of, for sure, it's just across the way here, Marion Square Park. I used to sleep there. I used to sleep out at Wallace. I used to sleep out at Fairview. Locations all over the city, bus stops. So yeah, I was surrounded by other people on the streets.
And then now you made it through this kind of season of violence growing up. Now you're in a season of homelessness. How did you make it out of that situation?
Yeah, so Matt continued to reach out to me and just genuinely love and care for me. And then there's a program that I got plugged into called The Most Excellent Way. It's a Christ-Centered Addictions Victory Group, because I'd been through like 8 different programs.
Here in Salem?
Yeah, it's in Salem. The home for the ministry is the church that I attend, but it's national and international. I've actually been able to, through God, introduce it to multiple countries, the Philippines, Costa Rica, and Mexico, which is one of the things that I get to do today versus what I used to do in some of those countries. So yeah, and through Christ, I found complete victory. So I get to walk in that victory. The violence is no longer a part of my life. The dope, the booze, everything that went with the drug world and gang life, those things don't exist for me anymore.
You were sharing with me the transition out of homelessness. You ended up sleeping on your mom's couch. And was that because she finally opened up the door to you, or was that you had to make that decision, I'm ready to stop being on the streets? And what did that moment look like for like you actually going from I'm on the streets, I'm in these encampments, to I think it's time?
Yeah, because I was also in and out of the mission too as a guest, and I'm just sitting there and having these conversations with Matt, and he's going, man, like, you know what you should be doing. I said, I know. And he just kept praying for me, and it was intentional. I went back and I told my mom, I said, hey, because we had used together, we shot up together in that house, so it's like every once in a while I'd be able to catch the couch and use some dope. So it changed the dynamic radically when the Lord produced in me something that I couldn't produce on my own. It was the moment of letting him take control, and it changed everything. But I was on the couch for a little bit, and then our relationship was still really tumultuous, me and my mom. So it wasn't easy initially, but as God started to change my heart, he changed the dynamic.
Yeah. So you're transitioning off the streets. Tell us when you decided to start Be Bold Street Ministries and what the early stages of that look like. So you went from being on the streets to now wanting to help people on the streets. What did that look like in the early stages?
So within 2 weeks of being clean and sober, the Lord led my heart back to the community that he rescued me from, back to the streets he rescued me from, and just started taking water bottles. Went down to Rite Aid. I was coming over the West Salem Bridge, and it's like, God, what do you want me doing? You know, and you've pulled me out of this for your glory, for your kingdom.
What year was this?
So this is going to be it'll be 8 years this next year.
Okay.
Springtime.
So around 2014.
Yeah. Yep. And
start taking water bottles down.
Yeah.
Any other resources that you...
Just water bottles initially.
And you started connecting. Were a lot of the folks like you recognized? Like these are some peers?
Yeah, which means people were watching. Is this genuine? Is this legitimate? Because people would say, man, if there was anybody that we would have said would have never made it out, you were the one.
So what were they possibly thinking? This is some sort of might be a manipulation tactic?
Yeah, so
like
they're just watching. Yeah, so
wow.
And everybody was watching because I had lived life in such a way that people were not going to believe anything that came out of my mouth. It was only going to be my words matching my actions that were going to be believed.
Yeah. At that time, did you have a message?
Yeah, the gospel.
So that at that time you had this message of hope and God and that there is a chance to change your life, but you're saying those words really meant nothing specifically to your peers that were down there, because they were like, we need to see some proof here. Like you can try to say whatever you want, but like what are you really about? How are you really changed?
Yeah.
So how long did you start bringing water bottles down to where they started being like, I think this might be legit, to where it gave you some credibility to speak your message?
Yeah, even with some of those folks, it was that first day. This gal, I went up to her and she's looking at me and she's like, thank you for coming up and speaking to me and reminding me that I exist. And I started bawling. And then she started to console me. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, and I just like, I get it. I remember that. I remember being so disregarded that it's like, dude, am I even existing? I know I'm here.
Yeah.
You know?
How did you wrestle with not being judgmental in that situation? Because I think a lot of people who come out of a difficult time, it can either go one way or the other. You can have sympathy and connect in that relating of difficult times, and it puts you in a place of truly wanting to serve, not necessarily wanting to be the hero. And then or it could drive you to a little bit more of a prideful, I made it out. I'm doing better than these people, so I'm the privileged one who gets the help. Like, how did you combat the prideful temptation to think that you're better than these people all of a sudden because you made it out?
See, that was the amazing thing. That was never a component for me. It was compassion beyond the count of measure. It's from the Lord, because I was literally just weeks from living it, you know, going from bus stop to bus stop, bushes to bushes, encampment to encampment.
And probably not naive, you could end up back there.
Yeah. And all it would be is me taking control of my life again. I proved what my best was over and over, and that's why I beg God, you got to do all of it. If you leave me a portion of this, I've already proved that I'm not able to maintain, you know, any semblance of life that would be considered functional.
Yeah, and obviously easier said than done. So what was there practical things that you integrated into your life consistently that actually helped you stay the course of remaining humble, wanting to continue to change your life, staying off of drugs? What were some disciplines that you integrated into your life that helped?
Yeah, so being in the Word every day, being in prayer, being in fellowship, staying plugged into community, not isolating, because there's so much that takes place after you've been using. I mean, I was using drugs for 27 years, and I mean, one of the biggest fears was, who am I going to be? So just really leaning into, going headlong into, hey, this is what God's called me to be. This is what His Word is saying. So it doesn't say this option I give you, and I'm like, God, I just want to be about all these things. This is amazing. It's all about get-tos. Not easy stuff, that transition, because I had so much to work through, but being able to just show up with the same compassion, understanding, and the ability to relate, just staying there.
How many people are involved in your organization now?
So as far as people that serve every year, there's hundreds of people that serve with the ministry, but as part of the ministry is 11 board members.
So you got 11 people, you got a couple hundred people serving with you alongside you. How did you go from passing out water bottles to what was the next steps of constructing what your team and group ended up being? Yeah,
so the first 2.5 years was me buying and selling antiques. That's what paid for all the ministry that was being done. So I'd work scrubbing toilets and then go buy and sell antiques, and that provided for the ministry. And then in 2017, we got our nonprofit designation and really started to, you know,
create like a vision and a structure,
a trajectory, and, you know, why God has called us. How do we actualize our mission?
One of the most fascinating things that you shared with me that stuck with me was that collectively as a group, the group that you've constructed to serve alongside you, you have a certain amount of hours together combined of living on the streets and being in jail.
Oh yeah.
So share some of those statistics with us of like your team together has a combined.
Oh yeah. Yeah. When it comes to drug world experience, and all the folks, I mean, we've got over, 1,000 years worth of combined. I mean, I had 27 years. We got guys that had 38 years drug world experience. Experiential knowledge we encourage nobody to ever gain or gather. And then time with homelessness, just even my wife and Gary, who was here today, we've got about 25 years. I had a decade, but 25 years collectively, but the team as a whole, probably a couple hundred years.
So it's what I love about that story and testimony and the way you've constructed your team of people that have experienced a lot of the things that people that you're serving now are going through. How have you seen that play into your guys' benefit as an organization of how to best come alongside, and what's some of the fruit that you've seen come from that?
Yeah, it has ultimately what it comes down to too is that if somebody doesn't have the ability to relate and they've never been there, there's only so far that they're going to be allowed to come in. That's just how the community is.
So there's a deeper trust
Yeah.
that you feel like your group kind of has been given with the homeless community here in Salem, because you've experienced a lot of the things that they're currently working through.
We know what time it is. Yep.
When it comes to, obviously your organization's still passing out water, passing out socks, blankets, sleeping bags, providing practical needs, especially during the wintertime. In addition to providing resources and making people feel seen, heard, loved, sharing your message of hope, what are the ways that you're building bridges with helping people that are saying to your team, I'm ready. I want deeper help. Maybe that could require a rehab or a shelter or a housing situation. How does your team help connect them to practical ways of getting off the streets and serving as a bridge?
Yeah, so it's something that we love doing. It's one of our main points within the ministry. We are able to navigate and get people connected to the services that they need per their individual needs. So like Josh, who's the COO for the ministry, oversees 11 drug treatment facilities in Oregon and Washington. And my wife is within the mental health field. We are directly in contact with all the other service providers. So instead of going through, I guess, what people would call the due process, call the person at the front desk, and then you go, no, we're just going to call the people that have the ability to say, yes, we're able to help now.
The decision makers.
Yes. So we are connected to all those folks, and we're able to say, hey, this is the situation. We need to get this person some help. And they're ready to get the help that they need.
Yeah, and what do you feel like here, specifically here in Salem, Oregon? There's a lot of nonprofits helping the homeless and providing other services. How do you feel like the collaboration is in Salem, Oregon, amongst these organizations? Are you finding it to be a little more competitive, or do you feel like there's true collaboration happening within the nonprofit sector here?
I think with some, there's genuine collaboration. We're part of multiple collaborations with a bunch of the other nonprofits, and I think that's part of it too, because we don't pursue the same funding that, a bunch of the secular or government entities pursue, so we're not seen as a competitor. So that can be a component for sure, but we get to work with all manner of nonprofit organizations, other faith-based organizations, secular, government. We get to come together. Like, we have multiple events throughout the year. Specifically, the most recent one that we did, we call it the We See You event. And it was a We See You birthday. So we want to celebrate everybody's birthday. Might not be their birthday. And we had over 40 organizations and entities represented there to meet the need of any need for any individual per their individual need that was out there.
Yeah.
So, which is, we love being able to do that, because we're not able to do everything. But we are absolutely called to do something. Yeah.
Salem being the capital of Oregon, a lot of politics, a lot of politicians here, a lot of policy is shaped here. Because my company is located here, and specifically my company that helps the homeless community, we've been paying attention to the ways that the city of Salem has been approaching homelessness in a variety of different ways. One of them being the sweeping of homeless camps from one part of the city to the other. Can you speak a little bit about what is the city, the capital, thinking when they're making a decision like that to do that? And what do you feel like could be a potential better approach than mobilizing people from one side of the city to another in regards to just because it feels like we need to clean up, quote unquote, that part of the city, or it's some sort of a political agenda? What do you feel like they're thinking when they're making that decision? Like, why is a decision like that made? And then what do you feel like could be a better approach?
Yeah, so for sure, I can speak plainly to this. Everybody knows that sweeps they're unsuccessful. It's not a solution. What it literally does is upend somebody, and then they have to go reestablish a dwelling somewhere. And unfortunately, there are no camping encampments that are permissible. So ultimately, all the folks, anytime a sweep takes place, they're going to be scattered to another location that ultimately...
It's not like solving the problem. It's
No.
just a temporary fix.
Yeah, and just from my own understanding, depending on the situation and what's visible bothers a lot of people, so people can get pressure from the top down, or if something happens within the community, crime increase, within the encampment, or something happens.
Who makes this decision?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know ultimately the people that end up having to come and pursue having everybody leave. And ultimately we get to be on site in those moments. Hey, what need can we meet? Can we get you directed to services? So we get to collaborate with those other organizations and come in those situations that are not successful as far as a solution and help navigate as people are having to transition to a new place.
Yeah. With any organizational structure, there's good and bad. When it comes to the Salem police, what has been your personal experience in specifically working with the homeless in their approach and their openness on being willing to kind of work alongside you or not work alongside you? What's been your experience with the police?
Yeah, we have a memorandum of understanding with Salem PD. We get to work with a lot of different law enforcement agencies, really for the betterment of our community. So they've got a new team, which is awesome. They come in and it's really about relationship. And so we all get to come in together. Hey, how can we help you? They'll call us. Hey, we've got this individual, because it's not about policing homelessness, right? Because being homeless is not a crime, and even though that there might be a push, people want homelessness to be policed as a crime. It's not a crime for people to exist and not be in a stick-built home.
Yeah.
So we get to see the heart of a lot of really solid law enforcement folks, because we get to serve side by side with them. And so we're a part of a community engagement with multiple other organizations. We've been a part of it from the conception, and the fruit that's been produced from it has set a precedence. It's amazing. The hope is that other communities in the surrounding areas and or nationally would adopt what has been so successful in this partnership with Salem PD and Marion County Sheriff, with all the different nonprofit organizations.
Yeah. When it comes to getting involved as an individual, like let's say I live in Salem, Oregon, and I'm wanting to actively get involved, obviously they can visit your website, beboldstreetministries.org, and contact you and actually come with your team to a homeless camp, provide resources, donate money, get involved. And I highly encourage people to do that, because I do think that you're approaching it from a very holistic approach where you're trying to help people truly transition people back into society in a healthy way and get them plugged in with the help and the resources that they need. So an amazing opportunity to get involved with your organization. What are some other organizations that come to mind in the ways that they're serving the homeless community or other needs in the community as well that you would recommend?
Yeah. So some of the folks that we work with on a regular basis is like the Kindness Closet. They're another nonprofit organization. They meet the clothing needs of our neighbors on the streets. We do a bunch with Arches, which is within community action. We do a bunch with Soaring Heights Recovery Homes, which is a transitional living home, which is amazing because we've actually been able to see a bunch of our folks on the street go straight from the street into those homes, and they've transitioned and now manage some of our community partners. So unrecognizable as the folks that you would meet on the streets. And I love how you shared that too, because advocacy for us is not to see somebody stay in the situation of houselessness. That's not advocacy for us. We absolutely are willing to walk through all the hard things to go from street to home.
Yeah. And really identify what people truly need. You know, for a lot of people on the streets, they need different things, and you have to develop some sort of a connection or relationship to figure out what they need, what they're willing to do, you know. As we're kind of wrapping this episode up, do you want to go back to a part of the story where you lost your brother? Because I think it really hits home with a lot of people that have a family member, brother, sister that they've lost. What would you say to that person that is currently grieving, going through a time of loss in their life right now?
Yeah. I know for me, I mean, how I could encourage somebody would be with the same comfort which I was comforted. You know, the Word of God. My brother came to know Jesus Christ, and I know the moment that he breathed his last breath, he was with him. I know that. To not set yourself apart, lean into community, reach out to people, because there's nothing easy about that kind of loss. The loss of a loved one in any way, shape, or form, let alone suicide. It's super difficult. It's not easy in any way, shape, or form. So surround yourself with the people that are going to shore you up, going to encourage you, and not necessarily, especially if it's due to suicide, there's so many opinions that end up doing significant harm and significant damage to people. So I guess I would encourage people, keep those opinions to yourself and just come alongside and shore people up, love people in the midst of the grief and suffering that they're inevitably going through due to the loss.
Yeah. And for you, it was Pastor Matt, being one of the people that really showed up consistently in your life and really was a major part of what you're doing now, you know, really planting the seeds in your life to show you that there is a better future for you and that you can and truly change and be a contributing member to your community. That's as local as it gets with Pastor Matt choosing to be a part of your life and walk through that. Do you still stay in touch with him?
I see him all the time.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I get to serve side by side with him now, which is amazing because he was always the what if. What if in a year everything's different? Cool, that sounds great. What if in 5 years? Bro, why does it keep getting further away? You know? And he's like, what if in 10 years? And so we're now 30 years down the road and we're in the what if stage. And so that, if you're the people that are grieving, get plugged into a church body.
That's as local as it gets, somebody coming alongside you, putting his arm around you, walking through life together. Why do you feel like local matters? Like, why do you feel like for you, you're dedicating a lot of your time, energy, resources? You and your wife are really fully dedicated to the city of Salem here, serving people on the streets. Why local for you? Why invest all of your time and energy and knowledge and message here in Salem?
Yeah, so we're a part of this community. We're a part of every portion of this community. And the difficulties that are faced by other communities are difficulties that we face because this is our community. This is our home. This is their home. This is our home. This is our home. Whether our neighbor lives in a tent or under a tarp or just some heavy-duty clothing and or stick-built house or the mansion or the makeshift shanty that somebody's put together with things they picked up next to the dumpster, this is our home. And we're all neighbors. And what does it look like to genuinely love your neighbor as yourself? I don't hate myself. I don't hate myself. And I'm called to love my neighbors as myself. Because for sure today I love myself, you know? And so it absolutely starts right out our front door. I get to be on mission 365 days a year, every single day. There's an opportunity. Are we going to take it? Or are we going to pick and choose? You know, for me, I got to be honest. I like, you know, send me. Just send me to the folks that everybody else. It's easy to disregard people. And so I love going to the folks that get disregarded. Yeah, this is our home.
Well, thank you for all the work you're doing in Salem. And thank you for sharing your story with us today. And just the inspiration that you are to a lot of people who have come from a generational curse, you know, a really difficult background, troubling upbringing, the loss of a family member, the loss of a sibling, and to come out and still prove that there can be better and that there can be hope. So thank you for sharing your story, and I'm truly inspired by what you're doing.
Oh, thanks for providing the opportunity. Any opportunity to share the hope that will never disappoint.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Love Your City podcast. If you want to find ways to get involved in your community, you can visit loveyourcity.org. If you have any questions or recommendations of grassroots leaders or nonprofits that we should be aware of, email us at media@loveyourcity.org.